Hey, Mr. Chairman, this is Warren Wells. I'm en route to get to a place where I can zoom in, if that's okay. So I'm in the car right now.
Sure, I understand, Warren. Thank you. And I understand, there's sometimes reasons when you can't have your video on to get the bandwidth you need to. I would much sooner have your voice than nothing. So.
Mr. Chairman, I have already started the live stream just for technical reasons, so just to let everyone know.
Thank you, Catherine. It is 1 p.m. Central Time, and I call this meeting to order. Casey Griffin on our staff will call the roll to establish a quorum. Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Cobbins. Ms. Cox.
Here.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Here.
Mr. Holt.
Here.
Mr. Gentile.
Here.
Mr. Jensen. Ms.
Here.
McInturf.
Here.
Mr. Mollenauer.
Here.
Mr. Morrow. Mr. Wells.
Here.
Mr. Chairman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 voting members present.
I declare a quorum is present, and we're duly convened. Vice Chair Cobbins is excused. This time I'll call on our General Counsel, Angie Sanders, to read the statement of necessity for an electronic meeting. Ms. Sanders.
Thank you, Chairman. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 844-108, the State Board submits this determination of necessity for its special call board meeting held via WebEx at 1 p.m. on March 4th, 2024. This meeting was called to consider a number of time-sensitive items, including approval of revisions to the promotion and retention rule, a resolution with regard to promotion and retention legislation, as well as changes to the English as a Second Language programs rule and policy to account for the state's selection of a new English as a Second Language assessment. Due to the time-sensitive nature of these issues and because state board members reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for purposes of this special call board meeting, and as such that this meeting should be conducted electronically. Notice of this meeting was posted on the State Board's website, along with the agenda and instructions for accessing the meeting. With that, Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. This time I'd like to recognize any remarks from any board members or from Dr. Morrison. If you have any, please raise your hand. I'll ask Dr. Morrison if she has any first.
I don't. Thank you, Chairman. It's good to see everyone.
Yes, it is. Are there any remarks from any board members who'd like to speak at this time? If none, then I just want to remind everyone that since we are meeting electronically, I would ask each board member to identify themselves when making their motions in their second. And also remember our board meetings as well as TCA 844-108 both require all votes taken during electronic meetings of the board to be taken by a call of roll. With that, we will start with our first item, which is our consent agenda, which is the adoption of agenda. Everyone should have that. Is there a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
So moved, Larry Jensen.
Larry Jensen moves, and did I hear Mr. Holt second?
Yes. Thank you.
Any discussion? If no discussion, I guess we have to call roll for this. Mr. Griffin, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins, Ms. Cox,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Mr. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Mr. Wells,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye,
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
the agenda is adopted. First item, action items, first reading, Ms. Jennifer Jordan. I know she's on. Oh, she's muted, I believe, maybe.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. I was already into the second line of this. I'm Jennifer Jordan. I'm Assistant Commissioner of Special Education and Intervention at the department. It's good to see each of you. I'm sharing the English as a Second Language program. Programs Rule 0520-0119 sets forth the requirements for the identification, screening, and service delivery for students who are English learners. However, in 2003, the Tennessee Department of Education ran a competitive procurement process for an English language proficiency screener, assessment, and alternative assessment because there were now multiple national vendors of English language proficiency tools from which a state can select. A new assessment suite, the ELPA 21, was chosen through this competitive process. To facilitate the transition from the WIDA assessments to the ELPA 21, the department is proposing an update to the ESL program rule as well as a English second language policy. The update to the rule will take out any specific reference to a particular ELPA or a particular language proficiency assessment and make that generic instead of vendor specific. And then we're going to have a complementary item called the ESL policy, program policy 3.207, that further defines this rule by setting forth specific assessment name, purpose, and cut scores. By having the name of the vendor in the cut scores and policy will allow the department and state board to more readily adopt a different assessment when in the future and allow for timely information to be provided to districts and school staff. In addition, the department proposes to add co-teaching as an approved delivery model, as well as edits for clarification and improved alignment to best practices for serving students, English learners through the rule. The state board will hold a rulemaking hearing to collect public feedback related to the ESL program rule prior to the final reading on May 31st, 2024. The Board of Education recommends acceptance of this item on first reading. The SBE staff concurs with this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. So we'll take these up obviously as separate items. The first item, item A, will be the policy. Before we start discussion, is there a motion to accept English as a second language program policy 3.207 as recommended? Do I have a motion?
So moved, Lillian Hartgrove.
Chair Hartgrove moves for, do I have a second to that?
Second, Jordan Mullenhour.
Mr. Mullenhour seconds. Now, is there questions or comments for Ms. Jordan?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms.
I do
Hartgrove,
have
Chair Hartgrove.
questions. Thank you. Thank you. On page 1 of the policy, the chart that shows up at the bottom of the page, where we're talking about the first semester and the second semester, and you provide the cut scores in the on the right side of that column. And I've noticed, and of course that's the way it reads, that below 3 in any assessment domain for the first semester. So this is the cut score. It says cut score, and then scoring below this point indicates the student qualifies as an English learner. But then the language below that says for first semester below 3 in any assessed domain, and then for the second semester below 4 in any assessed domain. So my question for you is, did you give any consideration to actually listing what the cut score is there? So in other words, the way I'm interpreting it, which could be wrong, so please clarify if I'm wrong, it appears to me then that for the first semester, the cut score is 3, and therefore anything below 3 would be indicating the student qualifies as an English learner. And likewise in the second semester, the 4, why would we not list 4 as the cut score? That's one of my interpretations there, and I do have a follow-up question. So if you could help clarify why you have below 3 in any assessed domain and then below 4, as opposed to actually stating what the cut score is.
I'm going to ask Joanne Runyon to come on. She is our senior director, and I think she is much more familiar with these cut scores. She's been involved in the steering committee, and I believe she's on the call. But Joanne, can you come on?
Yes.
I can attempt to explain, but you would do a much better job with that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Joanne Runyon. I am the Senior Director of Intervention Programs, and I will be more than happy to answer this question. So this language here was specifically taken from the assessment vendor, ELPA 21. They've done a lot of research, peer review on what constitutes meeting the criteria to meet ESL services. And we took this language as part of the steering committee and meeting with other folks in the department to make sure that we were in line with what has research for the assessment. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about how we've done this in the past, but in the past, our department used to have to run multiple analysis because this wasn't readily called out in the assessment that we were using before. But with this assessment provider, they have researched and have support with this language. So we took that language directly into our ESL policy.
Chair
So
Hartgrove.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Somebody was going to say something because I have a follow-up question on that.
Sure.
I did want to ask a clarifying question, Chair Hartgrove. Are you asking why one says 3 and one says 4? Because I believe that's the number of subtests. No?
I was going to ask that question, but my first question was centering around why would we not simply indicate that for first semester, the cut score is 3? Because is that not accurate to say the cut score is 3, and then you would interpret, anyone would, that anything below 3, they're not meeting the expectations, therefore they are an English learner. Is that a valid way to look at this?
It is a valid way to look at it. I know as we work together with our state board and our policy, the recommendation was to stick with the language that was in the research for ELPA 21. I'm not sure if with this meeting, we go back and we look at the wording and make adjustments based on what the board has recommended, but we surely can. I think Ms. Amy is with us. With this being my first time presenting with you all, I want to make sure that I follow the correct steps in this process, so we can most definitely go back and look at this.
And I thank you for that, because it is only me that is thinking we would make it more streamlined, easier for anybody to look at this and know this is the cut score. The cut score is 3, and it doesn't say that directly. And so rather than having someone have to interpret, well, a 1 and a 2 would be below. So it's just, maybe it's me being a little sicky about this, but that's my first point. So I would appreciate you all taking a look at that, and other board members can certainly weigh in and let you know if they think that that would be a valid recommendation, because one person, one board member alone would not certainly cause you to make a change and spend unnecessary time. So it could
No.
literally just be me.
Yeah, then I think that's a great point. Just another point for us, as we're looking at that language, just to ensure that it's understood that it's in every domain, that the child has to meet that 3 in every domain, because we don't want our assessors to confuse that with it only being in particular to one domain. So I really do appreciate this feedback.
Okay, and so the second part of my question does speak to the fact that, so when I'm in my first semester,
Yes.
then if I am at a 3, then I'm not classified as an English learner, if I'm interpreting all of this correctly.
That's correct.
that
If you
valid
made a 3 in every domain, that means that you passed that screener. So you would not receive the ESL services because you met the criteria and don't need to have those services.
Okay, and so that was, and that first level is just for kindergarten because it does not say K.
Yeah, it's only it's the first semester. And I think they take into consideration the fact that kindergartners are starting kindergarten and may not have some of the early literacy that may be needed for the screener. So this test is set up a little bit differently than the student that would be in the second semester if they've had, some experience or some educational trajectory for that first part of their kindergarten semester.
Okay, so I can be a kindergartner in second semester and I can score at a 3, and that would be considered not acceptable because
that is correct. And you would receive ESL services. You are correct.
Okay, I'm having a little trouble with that because I was a 3 before and I am still a 3, and now I'm considered below where I should be. That's what I'm interpreting.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman. Let me go ahead and clarify. So when students are screened in, they're screened in once. So I could be a kindergartner that is entering school, let's say July 27th in my first semester. And when I screen in, I'm taking the kindergarten first semester Alpha 21 screener. So my criteria would be different if I entered January 1st of that following year, because I'm entering as a kindergartner in that second semester, not in that first semester.
That helps immensely to clarify. Thank you so much. And
You
Chairman,
are welcome.
Thank you. I will have another question, but I want to reserve time for other people before I ask
Okay.
my second question.
What I would suggest, one thing, so on that column called student grade level, that might be student grade level when screened, because that's what you're saying, right?
That's
and
correct.
then in the far column, the column is, title of the column is cut score, and what you have is below 3 in any assessed domain. And so what I think Chair Hartgrove wants to do is just put the number of cut scores as 3, but I think your point is that it has to be, you've got to clarify that that is in every domain.
That is correct.
So either one of those is fine with me. But
okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm writing all these notes down.
I did have one question.
Sure.
The purpose of this policy, again, and I agree, makes it easier when you're going to change potential assessments. It's been a while since we changed. We've had the WIDA assessment ever since I've been on. I think it's supposed to use. How often do you expect that you would go through an assessment change?
Joanne, do you want me to get that?
Yeah, you can, Jennifer, or I can, whatever you like.
Yeah, so typically the contracts that the department does engage in, they're typically 5 years. Joanne, this contract is for 5 years.
It's 3, and then we have
3 with
the
an
opportunity
extension.
for the extensions. That's correct.
For 2 additional years.
Thank you. I think consistency is important as we go through. So good. Chair Hart, any other questions besides Chair Hartgrove? Go ahead, Chair Hartgrove.
Okay, on the second page of the red line version, number 4, it states that LEAs and schools may provide tailored services to students in grades 1 through 12 who score at least a level 4 in the domains of reading, writing, and either listening or speaking. I think for clarity purposes, I would recommend that the language there be changed, because it's my understanding that in this particular section, we're talking about a student scoring a 4 on 3 of those domains, and if one of them is below 3, then they would be eligible for tailored services. So I think the language does not necessarily lend oneself to understanding that. Even though I know the use of the word or is in between, I think but am I understanding this correctly? If I score a 4 on 3 out of 4, I'm not meeting expectations for all 4. So therefore, I still am eligible for services. So if I have 3 4s and 1 3 or below, I'm entitled to those tailored services. So I think the language needs to be shored up if I'm interpreting that correctly.
Yes, that is correct. So the way it is written, Chairman Hargrove, is that the student has to have a 4 in reading and writing. So those are like non-negotiables. They have to be 4 in those domains, and they can either have a 4 in listening or speaking. So ideally, if I'm a student in a district and Joanne Runyon has a reading in 4, a 4 in writing, and then perhaps I have a 4 in speaking, then I'm able to meet the criteria to have those tailored services.
Okay, so then again, if I understood that correctly, then if I score a 3 on one of those domains, then that's what allows me to be eligible for those tailored services, correct?
So let's say Chairman Hargrove, you had a score of 4 in reading and a score of 4 in writing, and then in listening you maybe had a 3, and in speaking you had a 4. Because you have 3 of those scores as a 4, you would get the tailored services. You are correct. So in listening you could either have a 3 or a 2, but because your reading, writing, and speaking are at a 4, you would meet the criteria of tailored services.
Okay. I think I'm going to have an offline discussion, because between first and second reading, I know that you can make some edits there, and it could just be me again. And unless another board member jumps in and it's just me not getting it, I think I get it, but just want to reserve some time to talk offline with members of you all, actually.
Thank you. And we have plenty of time to do that, Chairman Hargrove. We can meet offline and talk about that. And I know that we have a board presentation as well. Am I correct, Jennifer, when we meet in May? So maybe that's something to tease out a little bit more.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very
So
good.
Chairman Hargrove, we are going to be at the workshop on in May. So we'll have a much larger, broader presentation and hopefully clear up some of these questions and ensure that we have some clarity as far as in the rule and policy. But I'm happy to meet with you to talk about it. Joanne is the expert. We have a few more that on that steering committee that could do that as well.
Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Any other questions for this first reading on the policy, English as a second languages policy? If no other questions, I will note that Mr. Morrow has joined, so he's on the call and we'll have a vote here. No further questions, and let me ask Mr. Griffin to please call the roll. We have a motion and a second to accept English as a second language program policy 3207 on first reading. Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Cobbins. Ms. Cox.
Aye.
Ms. Hargrove.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. McInturf.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
English as a second language program policy 3.207 passes on first reading. The next item is the program rule. Ms. Jordan, you did describe that. Would you, anything else further you would like to say before we have a motion to get it on for discussion?
Just that the rule, really, those changes move those more specific vendor specific cut scores and vendor name to policy, and just tweaked a few things for clarity for educators. One specifically around co-teaching, which is something that we hear from educators wanting the opportunity to do that. So provides that opportunity, takes it out of a waiver process.
Thank you. So we do have a discussion here. Is English as a second language program rule 0520-01-19. Can I have a motion to accept that as provided so we can go into discussion?
So moved. Reinhold.
Mr. Holt moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
I'll
Second.
Warren Wells.
Mr. Wells, second. Got to get in there quick. Okay, so we have a motion and a second now. Discussion. Any questions for Ms. Jordan on the program rule?
I don't, Mr. Chairman,
Chair Hargrove?
I don't have a question, but I have a recommendation. It seems to me that under the definitions, you should include cut scores. And the reason I'm saying that, you may not necessarily have to define what cut scores are, although that probably would not hurt. When I first started looking at it, I naturally went to the rating system that we do for evaluations of teachers, 1 to 5. I just made that interpretation. I'm sure everybody did the same thing. However, it doesn't say that anywhere. I mean, it could be something else. It could be 1 to 10, right? It could be 0 to 10 or 0 to 5. So that's the only reason I'm suggesting for anybody who picks it up for the first time. I think it would be nice to know what we mean by cut scores and what those levels are. So
I think that's a very good point, particularly when other things we talk about cut scores of 40 and 50. So I think it's an excellent point.
We can definitely add that. Thank
Yes,
you.
we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? If no other questions, we have a motion to accept English as a second language program rule 0520-0119 on first reading. Mr. Griffin, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Ms. Cox.
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
Motion on English as a second language program rule 0520-0119 on first reading passes. Thank you, Ms. Jordan. That brings us to our actions on final reading. Item A is promotion and retention rule. Ms. Sanders, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the board, and I'm presenting on final reading revisions to the State Board's promotion and retention rule of 520-0103-.16. This rule outlines promotion and retention requirements for kindergarten through 8th grade students, including pathways to 4th grade promotion for 3rd grade students who score approaching or below on the ELA portion of the TCAP assessment in accordance with 49.6.3.115. Revisions are proposed to align 4th grade promotion pathways and the appeals process with Public Chapter 338 of 2023. This law amended the law to include an additional promotion pathway for 3rd grade students who score approaching on the ELA portion of the TCAP by allowing promotion if the student scored within the 50th percentile on the Tennessee Universal Reading Screener and the student is provided tutoring for the entirety of 4th grade. Public Chapter 338 also amended the parent appeals process to allow a parent of a 3rd grade student who scored approaching on the 3rd grade ELA portion of the TCAP to provide consent for school personnel to file an appeal on their behalf. This item also clarifies the criteria for a catastrophic situation appeal and specifies that documentation for an appeal must show a catastrophic situation occurred on the test date or within 60 days leading up to the 3rd grade TCAP administration or any makeup opportunities. Between first and final reading, revisions were made to require that LEAs and public charter schools notify parents of all 3rd and 4th grade students of these promotion and retention requirements. Revisions were also made to specify that students granted an appeal may enroll in summer programming and/or tutoring opportunities subject to availability of space in their LEA or charter school. Additional edits were made to this rule after the board voted at its February 2024 meeting to delay consideration of this item until the March special called meeting. At the February meeting, the board directed staff to work with the Department of Education to develop language that maintains a ground 1 appeal for students who score in the 40th percentile on a universal reading screener and meet other specified requirements. This revised item includes language based on the board's discussion at the February meeting and feedback from the Department of Education. The revisions modify the Ground 1 appeal for third grade students who score approaching on the third grade ELA TCAP. The revised Ground 1 appeal pathway requires the following: certification that a parent was notified of and agrees to comply with all requirements of a Ground 1 appeal. The student scores within the 40th percentile on any state board approved universal reading screener in the 2024-25 school year, and in the 2025-26 school year and thereafter, scores in the 40th percentile on the Tennessee Universal Reading Screener provided by the department. The LEA agrees to provide the student high dosage, low ratio tutoring for the entirety of 4th grade. The school agrees to develop an academic remediation plan for the student, and the student's ELA teacher and principal provide a recommendation that the student be promoted to the 4th grade. With that, Chairman, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Since I brought this to the board at the board meeting, I will move to accept as provided by Ms. Sanders today. So I move that we accept on first reading promotion and retention rule 0520-0103-16. I can have a second, then we can have discussion.
Second, Jordan Mullenhour, and I do have a couple of comments.
Mr. Mullenhour seconds. So then we're open for discussion. Mr. Mullenhour, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll just start with a couple of technical questions. Angie, I think these may be directed at you. Under subsection 7, there's the notice requirement for all students. In other sections of the same rule, we refer to parents and legal guardians. It would seem that we would want to be very clear that the notification is in fact to the parent or the legal guardian of all students. Is that correct? This is in, again, the heading under subsection 7. It currently says each LEA and public charter school shall notify all students in grade 3 and grade 4. Do we need to make sure that that message is very crisply clear that it's notifying the parents and or legal guardian?
That's a great catch. Yes, we would need to make sure the intent there was parents of the students.
Okay, we can maybe include, if there's any other amendments on the fly, we can maybe include those all in one or separately. Second question I had was, in the very end, we have 2 new provisions. This is, again, the last 2 paragraphs. There's a slight distinction between the two. One references the student may enroll in summer programming opportunities, and then the number 6 references the student may enroll in summer programming and or tutoring opportunities. I just wanted to make sure, are we intending there to be a distinction between those two?
Yes, we are, because if you are granted a Ground 1 appeal, the Ground 1 appeal now requires tutoring. And so we intentionally did not include tutoring in paragraph 5 there, because those students are already required to do tutoring.
Got it, because it would make it be optional. Okay, great. And then the last question is actually in the same 2 paragraphs. Is there anything here that's going to in any way impact the funding that a school gets as a result of any of the changes that we're making today?
It is not, we do not believe there is any fiscal impact for this rule. The requirement around tutoring, for example, these students are already eligible to select tutoring as a promotion pathway. And so we don't see any additional impact on districts through the revisions we've made to this Ground 1 appeal.
Okay, so just to clarify, under TISA, there's no distinction in the funding that they would receive under TISA as a result of this?
I would defer to the department on that. I don't believe so. I do know that there are provisions in TISA for additional funding for students who are rising 4th graders who are not meets expectations on the TCAP. So I know there are additional funding mechanisms in TISA for students who are below or approaching. But if there's anyone from the department that wants to clarify that, happy to let them step in.
Anybody from the department?
Correct. There would be no funding change.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll cede the time.
Okay, I want to clarify, make sure people recognize this is action item on final reading. So other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Hargrove, Chair Hargrove.
to Mr. Mullenhour's question, to a follow-up. And I have no basis to compare this, except that feedback from one district who is in a very rural area indicated she was hoping that the grant funding provided for the Tennessee All-Corps, which allows and is referenced in the Ground One appeal, that would continue. And it's my understanding that it will not continue, because the statement was made to me that the TISA funding would not be sufficient to cover the costs associated with these students. So that was, again, one district, but I represent that district. And so I wanted to make sure I made that statement, that there is valid concern, the appearance of valid concern, the funding would not be sufficient to provide the tutoring for the students in this particular Ground One appeal. So I'm just stating that for the record, whether it's a valid concern. I trust that the director of schools is clear about what her funding looks like. There have been other funding issues that have nothing to do with this whatsoever that has lowered the amount of money that districts are going to receive. So that's just a whole other can of worms I don't want to really open up beyond just stating that. So I'm just stating that for the record. There could be insufficient funds to cover the cost of that piece of the recommendation. That's not to say that it shouldn't happen, because we did receive a letter of support from the East Corps region, 22 directors, and I was personally pleased to see that. The comments that they made, I don't think we're going to read that for the record, but they were certainly supportive of what we're doing here. And so I was happy that we got that letter from them, and very thankful, because sometimes we seek to receive input and it's not always coming, or you get very little and it doesn't really let you know if this is still the right decision, or is the impact what you think it is, or what one person or two people say. So I'm appreciative of that. And Chairman Eby, I understand that you've been in contact with them to give them direct thanks for what they provided. So I'll just leave it at that. I just wanted to go on record as saying concern was expressed to me.
Thank you, Chair Hargrove. Yes, I was going to mention the letter that we did get from the East Corps. It was signed by all 21 directors, and really appreciate that. I will also say that, they recognize there is a small change from what we had presented at the last board meeting, and that is that during the first academic year, we would use any Tennessee Universal Reading Screener provided, and then years after that, it would be the one any approved state board approved Universal Reading Screener, and then after the first year, it would be a reading screener provided by the Tennessee Universal Reading Screener provided by the state. So consistency, again, I think is important. I think the state recognized this first year that there's a lot of systems out there that may not be using the Tennessee Reading Screener. And so to make that change mid-year didn't make a lot of sense. We worked very closely with the department, and I think this is a sort of win-win for everybody. The letter from the superintendents recognized this, they appreciated, and they also recognized the importance of having one reading screener in years to come. I did have one question, Ms. Sanders. Maybe I misunderstood you, but I thought you said 2024, 2025, and 2025, 25, 26.
I was going to try to correct the record there, so thank you, Chairman. Yes, you were correct. The rule reads that it's any state board approved screener in 23, 24, and thereafter it is the Tennessee Universal Reading Screener provided by the department. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes,
Chairman, I don't have a question. I just want to make a comment, because I think it's important for this meeting to say it on the record. When we were in workshop on February the 15th, you did open the floor up for discussion about this very topic. And many of us did express a lot of concern about the removal of the Ground One appeal. And I am personally, and I know many of you all are as well, pleased to see the work that happened behind the scenes with the department and with our team, and in particular with our legal counsel, Ms. Sanders, doing the homework, the legwork to make a determination that a ground one appeal was within the authority of the board to add back into this particular rule. So I was thankful. I am thankful for all of the people who had a hand in making this happen, and Mr. Chairman, for you certainly pushing the envelope in our board meeting on the following day, on the 16th. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's when it's the right thing to do. It's easy to do it. I do appreciate all the effort that the state board staff, legal staff, and the whole staff did putting this together, and then working again collaboratively with the Department of Education. There was a lot of discussion that went on for this. Other questions or comments? If none, then I will ask Mr. Griffin to call the roll for the vote. Oh, yes, Mr. Mullenhour, sure.
Just real quick, I think from a procedural standpoint, I believe I need to propose an amendment first to address the item in section 7. Is that correct, Angie?
Yes, paragraph 7.
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
Mr. Mullenhour, I'm sorry.
So just to clarify, so my proposal would be to change the language in subsection 7, where it currently reads, each LEA and public charter school shall notify all students, changing all students to the parents or legal guardians of all students. Angie, is that acceptable language?
Yes.
Okay.
So are you moving that as an amendment, Mr. Mullenhour?
Yes, sir. I'm making a motion to make the amendment as stated.
All right, we have a motion for amendment. Do we have a second to that motion?
Nate Morrow, second. Ryan Holt.
Mr. Holt seconds. We have to vote on the amendment first. So any discussion, further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Griffin, will you please call the roll with regard to accepting the amendment to the motion?
Mr. Cobbins, Ms. Cox,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow,
Aye.
Mr. Wells,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
So the amendment passes. Now we'll vote on the final motion as amended. Mr. Griffin, please call the roll.
Mr.
Griffin.
Cobbins, Ms. Cox,
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Mr. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow,
Aye.
Mr. Wells,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
Motion passes on final reading, the promotion and retention rule 0520010316. Thank you. Next item, item B, is a resolution of the Tennessee State Board of Education. Ms. Sanders, let's see.
I believe Mr. Holt is presenting that.
Okay, Mr. Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity to explain briefly why I wanted to offer this resolution. Our state has made great strides in education under the leadership of Governor Lee, the General Assembly, and the Department of Education over these past few years. Part of that success has been declaring that it is a top priority for our state that all of our students can read, and not just read the words on the page, but understand what they are reading so they can become lifelong readers and then read to learn. There was a lot of good in the law involving 3rd grade and 4th grade reading and promotion. We are identifying the students who need the most supports, and we're giving them those supports. Our board has heard from teachers from around the state over the past couple of years that the high dosage tutoring for students who need it is in particular a great thing. We are excited to see that tutoring start to bear fruit. There is something else we've repeatedly heard as we've traveled throughout the state, and that is that for this law to do the most good, its provisions should be moved earlier. In other words, move it up from 3rd and 4th to the earliest grades that would work. When the law was passed, the earliest we could assess reading statewide, as I understand it, was 3rd grade. And I understand that's why 3rd grade was the start date in the law for 3rd grade promotion and 4th grade promotion and retention. Thanks to the hard work and the vision of many people, we now have universal reading screeners being used throughout our state. That is a new introduction since the promotion law was passed. As a result, we can now identify which students need the most supports and provide them those supports earlier, perhaps as early as kindergarten or 1st grade. I'm bringing this resolution not because I think I have all the answers on the details of this law. I certainly don't. I'm bringing it to express my general belief that these provisions would do more good if they are brought earlier in grades where so much of the focus is on learning to read. I've got a kindergartner at home at my house, and when he goes to school, he is learning the basics of reading every day. That's the focus. I also have a 3rd grader at home, and his teachers aren't teaching him the basics of reading anymore. In 3rd grade, the standards have moved past that. It's assumed that he knows how to read now that he's in 3rd grade. I don't know what the right grade is to start. The universal reading screeners start in kindergarten. And if it was possible to move the law up to kindergarten, we've heard from teachers across the state that that would be ideal. But I'm told that given the nature of the test, the reading screener, it may not be possible to do it reliably starting in kindergarten. What my resolution says, as I understand it, is the sooner the better, but we couldn't figure out just in the past couple of weeks since the last board meeting what exactly the contours of that should be. If it were the will of this board to adopt this resolution, I'm hopeful that the General Assembly will consider it in the spirit of collaboration and continual improvement in which it is offered. Even when you're on the right path, you may have to adjust course slightly from time to time to get where you want to go the fastest. Thank you.
Mr. Holt, thank you. Since this board doesn't adopt resolutions that often, I think we know the importance of a resolution that we would adopt and propose. Let me ask you to please read the resolution so we have it on the record, if you would, please.
I'm happy to do that, or if Mr. James, I
James?
thought I'd understood that that might be what he was going to do, so you all wouldn't have to hear me speak for another 3 minutes.
Mr. James, would you please read the resolution?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. A resolution of the Tennessee State Board of Education by Mr. Ryan Holt, whereas TCA 49-1302A specifies it is the duty of the board and it has the power to study programs of instruction in public schools, kindergarten through grade 12, analyze the needs of such public schools, study the use of public funds for such public schools, include the conclusions of the studies and analyses in its annual recommendations to the Governor and General Assembly for the funding of public education. And whereas TCA 49-1302A3 specifies it is the duty of the board to develop and maintain current a master plan for the development of public education, kindergarten through grade 12, and provide recommendations to the executive branch, the General Assembly, and the local boards of education and directors of schools regarding the use of public funds for education. And whereas the members of the State Board of Education share a common commitment to the academic success and intellectual growth of Tennessee's students with the governor, legislators, parents, teachers, and students alike. And whereas Tennessee, under the leadership of its General Assembly and Governor Bill Lee, and through the countless hours of work on the part of its educators, has taken bold and strategic steps towards ensuring students have the skills and resources they need to achieve academic proficiency in English language arts. And whereas the passage of the Tennessee Literacy Success Act in 2021 set forth numerous excellent provisions, ensuring that students in grades K-3 are provided instruction grounded in foundational literacy skills, an evidence-based method of teaching students to read that includes phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension that enables students to develop the reading skills required to meet Tennessee's academic standards. And whereas the passage of the Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act in 2021 set forth numerous excellent provisions governing supports and added instruction for students who are not at grade level in English language arts before promotion to the third or fourth grade. And whereas as a result of the passage of the Tennessee Literacy Success Act in 2021, grades K through 3 are now the grades where students are provided foundational literacy skills instruction to support their ability to read. And whereas when the Tennessee Literacy Success Act and Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act were enacted, the earliest grade level with reliable literacy data was third grade. And whereas since this time, Tennessee students began taking 3 reading screeners a year, beginning in kindergarten and continuing through first and second grades. And whereas the data from these reading screeners can be utilized to trigger key supports, interventions, and retention decisions earlier in the student's academic career. And whereas Tennessee offers an optional but widely administered second grade cumulative assessment. And whereas it is in the best interest of students, families, and the state to promote children who have mastered the fundamentals of literacy. And whereas retaining a student in grades K through 3 rather than 3 and 4 will ensure that students who are in the most need of additional reading support will have access to foundational literacy skills instruction at the critical point in their foundational literacy development should they be retained. And whereas Tennessee should not retreat from its commitment to academic excellence evinced in this work. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the State Board of Education of the State of Tennessee that we do hereby respectfully request the Governor and General Assembly reconsider the provisions of the Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act of 2021 by maintaining the excellent supports for struggling readers, but moving retention provisions to the grades kindergarten through 3 rather than third and fourth grade. Be it further resolved that an appropriate copy of this resolution be transmitted to the Governor and the members of the Senate Education Committee and members of the House Education Instruction and Education Administration Committees and be posted on the State Board of Education website with this final clause omitted from such copy.
Thank you, Mr. James. So that we can have discussion, is there a motion on the floor? I presume, Mr. Holt, you will move for this resolution to be adopted. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to move for its adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Larry Jensen. Larry
Larry-
Jensen, second.
Mr. Jensen seconds. Now we can open the floor for discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Chair Hartgrove.
I do have a question with regard to, on page 2, when you have a printed copy, which I happen to have the printed copy in front of me, on the third whereas paragraph, we talk about retaining, it says, whereas retaining a student in grades K3 rather than grades 3, 4. And I'm not going to say the rest of the language since Mr. James already read that to you. Clarification why we would not say retaining a student in grades K through 2, rather than grades 3-4. Would you help me to understand why we would not do K2, especially in light of the discussion we have had in our board meetings, workshop, and with other educators throughout the state? Why would we not use K2 there, since we have heard a number of times from various sources that grade 3 is too late? And even you, Mr. Holt, stated that your son or one of your children, and you have 2 sons, don't you, in grade 3, 1 and 3, that they're already into the standards and they're beyond teaching reading at that juncture. So could someone speak to, and Mr. Holt?
Thank you, Chair Hartgrove. Thank you, Chair Hartgrove, for that question. I had exactly the same question too. So somebody can speak to why it says K3 and not K2.
And further down in the.
Yes, Mr. Holt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm happy to respond to that, and then Chairman Hartgrove, any other questions that you have on it. And really the intention there, as I tried to anticipate in my opening remarks, was that I do believe that we should, and again, this is, as a state board, we are not the legislators. We acknowledge that. It is not our job to make or change the Tennessee code. What this is an attempt to express the will of our body based on the continuing discussions that we have been having for really years at this point with our constituents, with educators across the state. And my understanding from those has been repeatedly that earlier is better. And so my own personal belief from hearing those is that earlier is better. The reason why the text of the resolution that we have before us is K3 instead of K2 or even K1 is just because, as I understand it from discussions that have occurred in the past couple of weeks, it's not entirely clear to me that we would be able to reliably assess reading early enough that we could, sitting here today, say it needs to be all before third grade. If we could do that, then that is what I would prefer to have in this resolution. And if anyone wanted to propose an amendment to it, I think that might be a sensible thing to do. But I wanted us to have a discussion as a body and including with anyone else from the department or state board staff who wants to speak to that point, because I think it's, we're not going to propose exactly what this, if there would be a change in the law, exactly what that would be. But I do think it would be helpful for us to have a robust discussion about kind of why it would be that we would focus on certain grades rather than others.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, you may want to say something first before I jump in and add more to why I think we should change it to K2.
Well, everything that we hear and that from teachers and from parents and all, I think the longer that we go before we recognize the importance of having some intervention, the more difficult it is for that child. I understand that, you read to learn in K through 3, and then you learn to read in K through 3, and then you read to learn past third grade. But if there was a way that we could somehow emphasize the importance of having it earlier in K1 and 2, I know from personal experience, it's much easier to retain a student in kindergarten or first grade than it is in second grade and it is in third grade. So I understand what you're saying about, do we have an adequate capability to assess whether that person is reading on their grade level or not in the earlier grades? But I leave that to the educators and to the expert, which I'm not. So it would be nice to hear from them. But that's my point too. I don't know, Chair Hartgrove, if that you got other points to make there.
That's the primary. I'm on the same page with you, Mr. Holt, as well as you, Chairman Eby. I think because of the discussions and even our conversations with the teacher advisory group, they provided a lot of excellent input that had an impact on, I think, most of all of us, and hearing from their perspective, as well as we recently, maybe you have not seen it yet, received an email from Jerry, I'm sorry, his last name just escapes me, one of the teachers that was with us with some additional comments regarding the this particular subject matter and being K2 versus K3. And so again, not the educator among all of our educators who are with us today and who are not with us. I certainly respect their opinion. When I was viewing this from the moment that you mentioned this resolution, Mr. Holt, when we were in our board meeting, is that I view this as, here's this opportunity to present this to the General Assembly and the governor for their consideration and for them to assess what that would mean to them and what that would look like in any potential changes to legislation and or recommendation to the department. I know they would be looking to the department and any of our experts to also weigh in on what would that look like. But we've heard it, we believe it, we need evidence. But I think with this resolution, we should be asking for them to dig into what that K2 space looks like versus we're concerned about 3 and 4 already. We might even be concerned about 2. Why would we want to leave in the third grade in our language when that's what we've already heard from many other people, that's too late?
Thank you, Chair Hartgrove. I think Mr. Mollenauer has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question kind of along the similar veins, but I want to step back for just a second and just say, Ryan, really appreciate you taking the initiative here. I know that other members or other members of the staff have participated, and all of us, I'm sure, have heard from a lot of people across the state. I think it has been a robust conversation. It's worth noting, I believe former Chair Hartgrove made mention that this was a very robust discussion in our last meeting. And if there's questions about kind of how we've arrived to this point, you can go on YouTube and look at those prior discussions if you want some additional context. I think I'm speaking for all of us in saying both the members of the board as well as the staff that all of us have spent a lot of time thinking about this. It is a very important matter. This is not a flippant decision being made today. There's many hours of deliberation up into this point. And Ryan, I'm grateful that you picked the ball up here and charged forward. A couple things. One is I think your posture towards the state legislature is absolutely correct. We're not the state legislature. We're not the one making laws. We can help surface information and surface perspective that our legislators might want to take into account. I thought you did a beautiful job at the bottom of page 1 in the last 3 paragraphs, where you essentially say, hey, when the law was crafted, here's what we knew at the time. Here's the information that they had at the time. They did the best they could at the time. New information is now available. So, does it make sense for us to sort of revisit and recalibrate? I thought you did a great job of kind of framing the fact that this is not the state board saying, hey, we think you did a terrible job. This is the state board saying, hey, there's some additional perspective, there's additional data, there's additional opportunities to refine. So I appreciate you taking that approach. My question is this. I'm a little concerned that there could be some differences in. I think the objectives. I think all the people that I've heard speak to this have had a very similar objective in that we want to intervene earlier, we want to equip children earlier, and we want to get them on the right path earlier. However, it would be easy to misunderstand in the actual language of the resolve. It would be easy to misunderstand this for saying, hey, we don't think we should have this in 3rd and 4th grade. We think it should be quote unquote moved to K through 2 or K through 3. It would make sense to me that we might take the posture of, hey, let's add some of these additional resources. Let's add some of these additional processes to intervene earlier in those earlier grades, but let's not move it from or out of 3rd or 4th grade. And the reason being, we are going to have students who enter into the education system here in Tennessee, and their first touch point is going to be 3rd grade. And we don't want to create a situation where the legislature might misunderstand the intent here and might follow that vein and end up, quote unquote, moving the mechanism from 3rd and 4th grade to those lower grades, and thus creating a situation where some 3rd and 4th graders could slip through the cracks. So I just want to get your clarification or get your perspective on exactly what your intent is. Are we moving it, or are we just saying, hey, keep what you've got in 3rd and 4th grade, but let's add some of those resources into those earlier grades? And I have some suggested language to potentially clear that up if in fact your intent is the latter. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Holt.
Mr. Molnar, thank you for those comments and also for your careful reading of the language and making sure that we are expressing what it is that we intend to express. That's crucially important. I will say that my own intention was that we would, along the lines of what Chair Hartgrove was explaining moments ago, propose that the retention and interventions supports be moved forward from where they are now to an earlier time period, that they would not continue to exist at a minimum 4th grade, but then also potentially 3rd grade as well, based on where our discussion ends up on what the exact grades are that we should say in the resolution. But you make a good point that I had not considered about the fact that there may be students entering into our schools who have not, by virtue of moving from another state, perhaps, haven't had those supports so far. And I don't know if we want to go so far as providing for that scenario in the resolution, just given my understanding of the resolution being sort of just a kind of a short and simple statement of what our board believes our kind of our principles are. I'm not sure that would be opposed either to some sort of clarification along those lines.
Mr. Mullenhour, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, let me read some language, Ryan, that might help get us on the same page here. I think I'm going to go back to a comment you previously made. I think, or maybe it was our chair, you know, the state board doesn't issue many of these resolutions. I would hope that the resolutions would mean something. I think that they do. I think that some legislators, at least, if not many or most, will read it and wonder sort of how we arrived at this conclusion, and perhaps use it as a guiding document to sort of shape their narrative or shape their inquiry. And for that reason, I think it would be important for us to not just raise the flag and say, hey, you know, we think this stuff should be moved down, but also be careful that we don't inadvertently create a situation where, again, third graders are sort of falling through the cracks. So I do think that it's important, if we're going to make a resolution, I think we do need to be, or if we're going to issue a resolution on the part of the board, I think we need to be careful that we send them down the path that's intended. And I would like to read just a minor edit to see if it suits your taste, but I'll pause there and let you respond.
I think we'd like to hear what your edit would be, Mr. Mullenhour, and I've asked Mr. James to put the original resolution on the screen so others can see it too. So you can tell us where you would put this edit so we can consider it.
Okay, great. So in the section titled "Be it resolved by the State Board of Education," where it reads, the Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act of 2021 by maintaining the excellent supports for struggling readers. And then now I'm going to read the proposed addition or proposed change. It would read, in the 3rd and 4th grade. Nathan, I don't know if you want to type that out as a placeholder. So in the 3rd and 4th grade, and including provisions that afford similar support to grades kindergarten through 3. And maybe we change the 3 to 2 since 3rd grade might already be inclusive. But so it would read as follows. It would say, be it resolved that we do hereby respectfully request the Governor and General Assembly reconsider the provisions of the Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act of 2021 by maintaining the excellent supports for struggling readers in the 3rd and 4th grade, and including provisions that afford similar support to grades 3 or kindergarten through 3. So the intent, again, is to recognize that the good work that they've done in 3rd grade, not propose to displace that or remove that, but simply add in a similar construct so that we can begin to influence the kids in K through 2. Thank you.
I'll address my thoughts on that and give other people a chance to think about it. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Mullenhour, and clearly I think you bring up a good point with regard to people who come in. I think the emphasis on this resolution, as I read it, I don't know if it's how Mr. Holt was saying about it, is that we want to highlight the importance of getting started early, K through 2 or K through 3. And with the words that you have there, it just says, as I read it, it just says, oh, and we're going to add K1 and 2 onto it. It doesn't put the emphasis on K1 and 2, which I think is at least that was the value that I saw in what Mr. Holt was presenting. I don't know if that's what you were intending to do, Mr. Holt, or not, but I'm concerned that the wording as is here, you lose a little bit that emphasis. Mr. Holt, do you want to say anything?
No, it's hard to put all of the ideas I think that we have into one sentence, which is what we are trying to do here today. And I actually don't think that we would be able to do that, but I do think that we, based on the discussions that we have had on the record, that there likely is a great deal of support sort of generally on the concepts here. But yes, Mr. Chairman, my emphasis was intended to be on the sort of relocating from the grades where the retention intervention law is now to earlier grades by virtue of the fact that when the law was passed, we didn't have these earlier opportunities to identify those readers, and now we do.
Other comments or questions? Chair Hartgrove, were you getting ready to say something?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I agree with what Mr. Holt just said, because that's when this first came up, and before he even offered the resolution, I was excited about the resolution, but we've been talking about this, and there are legislators that are actually talking about K2, that 3 and 4, frankly, are too late. So I appreciate what Mr. Mollenauer is recommending, but I'm concerned that it might not be clearly understood. And I think your point about students entering 3rd and 4th grade, perhaps coming from other states, we certainly do not want to lose supports for them, but I'm not sure that this accomplishes that. So I am all in favor of shining the spotlight on the K to 2 group of students who we really should be focusing on. And how we do that, I think we could probably spend some more time. I'm not sure that Mr. Holt, since you are the author of this, I turn back to you to see what you recommend at this juncture, or Mr. James and our executive director, Dr. Morrison, if there's something else you suggest in conjunction with our chairman.
I think we have some others who have their hands up. Mr. Morrow, did you have your hands up?
I just want to, I mean, I think I actually like the original language of Mr. Holt. I mean, while I agree with Mr. Mollenauer, I think it exists, and so we need to focus on how can we support what already exists and shine that spotlight. But here's my thought on it: the difference between K2 and K3 is somewhat negligible, though I think we need to focus in on the K2. I think keeping K3 is important because you have a hard backstop with the TCAP. Right now, leading up to the TCAP, there is a lot of different variables of assessment and reading screeners that you're allowed to use within the state. And so for having one common hard backstop for all readers in Tennessee with what we have in our existing structures for assessing, I think is really important. And so I just want to, and a lot of our reading curriculum, they consider foundations K3, like where 2 begins and 3 ends. There's a little bit of negligible in there, but since Mr. Holt, I just wanted to say back after you read the first time you read your resolution, I just wanted to say I think it should say K3 with our existing situation that we have with the 3rd grade TCAP. Because I also want to make sure, and I said at the last board meeting, no one is saying we need to test less or assess less. No one is saying that we need to minimize or reduce requirements. I actually think it's opposite, saying we want to have benchmarks along the way so that when you get to the hard backstop in 3rd grade, which is the TCAP, there shouldn't be surprises because the screeners have worked, 3 benchmarks a year for K, 1, and 2. You have 9 benchmarks that you should have before the 3rd grade year. So to me, keeping 3rd grade in and your original language just makes sense. And I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. Ms. McInturf, I believe you had your hand up too.
Yes, I think K3 just fine as well, because we've got to remember in the original 3rd grade, we have all those pathways. So hopefully, even if you get to 3rd grade and you don't get the meets expectations, you still have those pathways that you would not see in 4th grade. So I think that would be more of a non-issue. And also I was looking at, if we kept the tutoring in the summer school for 3rd and 4th grade, that would it wouldn't change anything money-wise, because they've already put into law that if they are retained in K3, they still get tutoring. So we could keep that language of if they don't meet expectations in 3rd and 4th grade, they'll still get all the supports, just lose the retention side of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think what I hear what you're saying, Mr. Holt.
It does, Ms. McInturf. It makes sense to me. And I wanted to thank you also for your leadership on this issue. I think that, your passion for it has certainly inspired me and I think many of us, if not all of us. And, from my conversations with folks on the state board staff, I think part of what I was hearing is what I'm hearing from you and from Mr. Morrow, which is the idea that, although we're not here crafting legislation, that's not what we do. If there were changes to the law and these provisions were moved earlier, then likely they would be taken advantage of earlier in kindergarten or first, where it sounds like from all we've heard of, they are most likely to do the most good. And then third would really just be a backstop, as you all have put it. Mr. Chairman, could I ask for Ms. Morrison to be able to speak on this? I think she might have some points I know have been helpful to me in my thinking on it.
Sure. I think Mr. Wells wanted to speak first, and then we can ask Ms. Morrison if that's all right. Dr.
Certainly.
Morrison. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, everything I was going to ask has been answered, and pretty much any comments I would have had have been said by somebody else. So just Mr. Holt, I think you did a great job on this. And the only concern I really had was, getting across to the legislature that you say collaboration, I think partnership and on this. And I think you were very clear in that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison.
Yes, and thank you, Chairman and Mr. Holt. Like Mr. Wells, many of the things I was thinking and would have said have been surfaced, so I don't have a whole lot more to add. But I would say, when people ask me one thing, what's the thing that I'm most excited about in terms of what's happening in Tennessee right now? Generally, the first thing I say is this shift in early literacy, because I really think we have taken on the hard work as a state, and we are seeing the fruits already of that effort in terms of students across the state, teachers across the state, really deeply understanding the foundations of reading from pipeline to pre-service, and that's going to continue to pay dividends for our students. I think we're also in a new world, as Mr. Holt's resolution articulates, where we have data earlier than third grade. As Mr. Morrow said, that really still is kind of our backstop as a state in terms of our consistent TCAP, high stakes assessment measure. People will argue on different sides whether or not you should have high stakes assessments earlier than that. We have an optional second grade assessment, but currently the general thinking is third grade is about the earliest that you can reliably and reasonably have a high stakes assessment. And so for that reason, I really like the language in this resolution because it's pushing us as a state to say, okay, we're doing all the things that we need to be doing in terms of the shifts in instruction. We're looking earlier with this screener data to encourage retention conversations at a minimum. If I will have a parent of a kindergartner next year, if he is not on grade level on the screener, I would want and expect those teachers and the principal to share that information with me. And for my husband and I to be able to make that decision to retain him in kindergarten, where we'll know he'll get more of that foundational support earlier in his career. And if we imagine a world where the legislation is more sort of prescriptive about those kind of conversations and those kind of potential retention decisions, then I think a lot of that will begin to happen much earlier. Certainly many districts are already making those choices to have those conversations with parents based on screener data. But as Mr. Wells, actually, I think as Mr. Holt said, there still is a lot of variability in those screeners. We have 7 screeners that are approved right now. So again, just thinking about TCAP as that one consistent backstop, in my opinion, I think the language that you have here makes a lot of sense. It pushes us in the right direction as a state to look at those earlier grades and use data responsibly to make decisions earlier than third grade, but allows for that backstop to remain in third grade where we have that consistent TCAP measure. Mr. Holt, let me know if there are any things that you and I have talked about that I didn't share, but like I said, many of those points had already been surfaced, and appreciate this discussion, certainly on a really important issue.
Let me ask.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. That covers it.
Yeah, I was asking Mr. Holt, so you're satisfied with Dr. Morrison's comments? All right.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Mullenhour, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a couple points of clarification. I guess the first I should mention, Nathan, as you're looking at your screen there, is I had intended to then delete the remainder of that sentence. Thank you. Just so we have a frame of reference for the point of this conversation. I sense that we're all moving in the same direction. The emphasis here is, in fact, hey, let's try to let's encourage and ask the legislature to evaluate ways to move this into the earlier years of a child's education. I think we're on the same page there. My concern would be if I'm a legislator and I've got hundreds of bills that I'm thinking about or that I should be thinking about at some level, and they're crossing my desk and probably going in every direction, and then I get memos from a lot of different organizations and a lot of different and resolutions from different boards. let's assume for a second we have a legislature who's not been privy to any of these conversations. If they read this, I think a legislator who thinks about the crafting of law and sees the word move, what they're anticipating is we're going to take it out of one section or we're going to take it out of one place and we're going to put it into another place. And again, I would just raise the flag here that if we do that, if a legislator who doesn't understand the full backdrop reads this and says, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, let's move it from third grade down into K through 2. If you're the family that just moved here from name the state and you've got a third grader, are we running the risk of leaving that third grader out in the cold? So again, I think I love the way that this has been crafted. I love the heart behind it. I think it's a good idea. It's not law. It'll be debated more fully and completely, and the language will be tailored accordingly. But I also think we just need to be careful that we don't ask legislators to run down a path that we don't intend. We can still emphasize K through 2, but I think we need to also make sure that it's not misunderstood that we're proposing that they remove this also from the third and fourth graders, that they could benefit from it.
Thank you, Mr. Molinar. I think one thing you said was very true, is that we're not developing law here. And I believe that before it becomes law, it will take a lot of discussion and debate and fine tweaking. I think what we're doing is sort of setting the intent that we have as a board, that we would like to see early reading, use these assessments earlier than more. I haven't heard a motion that you want to move to make that change, and then that would require a second. So I'm just getting text here. I'm not sure where somebody suggests we use focusing instead of moving or something, but are you making a motion to make that change? And then we can discuss.
Yeah, I'm not making a motion at this point. I mainly wanted to raise the flag on the issue, understand from Mr. Holt what the intent was, and it sounds like others have expressed that the language as is adequately expresses the intent. It's probably not worth everyone's time on this call to make a motion that wouldn't succeed. So I would say I would just ask. I guess I would ask Mr. Holt if anything that you've said here today would suggest to you, Mr. Holt, that we need to tailor the language. I would put it back into your hands. If you think that the language is sufficiently descriptive of your intent, then I would say let's proceed forward.
Mr. Mollenhauer, I did find out what this changes. Instead of saying leave it as it was originally, but instead of saying but moving retention provisions to the grades kindergarten through 5, change that word moving to focusing. So supports for struggling readers, but focusing retention provisions kindergarten through 3, and then that leaves it open for the legislators. Okay, we're going to keep something for these special cases, these other cases that you talk about.
Yeah, I think that would be another good way to get at both objectives of emphasizing the earlier grades and also not leading a legislator down a path that suggests that we might be wanting them to actually remove it from third grade. So yeah, I think that would be a good suggestion. Mr. Holt, what are your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I guess my thoughts on the original language, I believe adequately and clearly expresses at least my intent, which is if we are moving the retention and supports, and that's not stated, but I think it's implicit and hopefully would be understood, moving the retention and support provisions to grades kindergarten through 3 from the 3rd and the 4th grade, then we would be, if that would occur, it would only actually be removing the retention provision from 4th grade. Because if you move it from 3rd and 4th to K through 3, it's still there as 3, as I think Ms. McInturff said, or Mr. Morris said, as a backstop. So we wouldn't be removing it. And for Mr. Mullenhour, your point on the students coming in from out of state and being in third grade, then they would get the backstop for that. It would only be in fourth grade where, if the General Assembly were to move forward along these lines, that the retention provision would be removed. And the reason why I think that that's at least my intention with the resolution is because we have heard repeatedly from folks that by fourth grade, it's really too late. And so that is a point where it seems like it, maybe even doing more harm than good, but certainly would do a lot more good if it's moved forward from K through 3.
Let me ask Mr. James if he can remove the changes that we've made so that we go back to the original language. Okay. No, okay, I'm lost on my screen. There we go. So be it resolved by the State Board of Education, the State of Tennessee, that we do hereby respectfully request the Governor and the General Assembly reconsider the provisions of Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act of 2021 by maintaining the excellent supports for struggling readers, but moving retention provisions to the grades K through 3 rather than 3rd and 4th. And the only thing I'm suggesting doing, I think we all recognize that's where we want the focus to be. But if you change that one word moving to, but focusing retention provisions K through 3 rather than 3rd and 4th grade, seems like to me that would tell the legislators, the people who are writing the law, gives them the option, okay, we're going to write the law. We can have Nathan and company work with them and say, we understand these special cases. But where we want to do is we want to focus on K through 3, not on 3rd and 4th grade. But Mr. Holt, we can do it however you want to do it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not opposed to a language change if that's what the board's desire is to do on that point. I think that we're getting across in general the same concept.
I would then move to amend what the wording here from, but moving retention to focusing retention. If I would make that motion, if there's a second. Mr. Mullenhour seconds. Any further discussion on that?
Chairman Eby, in that case, this is the English teacher in me, but would you want to say focusing retention provisions in grades kindergarten through 3 as opposed to the small change?
We appreciate your, us engineers don't. Thank you.
Thank you. There you go.
So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
Chrissy McInturf.
Ms. McInturf.
I feel like changing that one word really changes our focus. I think it takes away what Mr. Holt was saying. I mean, we're really wanting to not retain students in 4th grade especially. So I feel like this kind of, I don't know, I feel like it changes the intent of what we were originally thinking. Like this really shows if we say, but moving, we want to keep the supports, all the supports for struggling readers, but just that retention portion needs to stay in K3.
Thank you, Ms. McInturf. Other discussions on the proposed amendment?
I have a similar comment, and I'm not going to articulate it as well as she did, but I think maintaining moving instead of focusing is drawing attention to what the intent of what Mr. Holt was trying to accomplish. That's my opinion, and I just wanted to add it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hargrove.
Warren Wells.
Mr. Wells.
Yeah, I agree too. I think it just kind of dilutes it a little bit. I felt pretty strongly about moving it to before also.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions before we vote on the amendment?
One more, Chrissy McInturf. Could we say, sorry, could we say transitioning the retention provision? So just kind of, I mean, just another word for moving. I don't know, just so it's not as aggressive, but just not losing that. Like he said, it kind of dilutes it if we just keep it as focusing.
The only thing about transitioning seems to me that that's something over time. Is it going to lose? Is it going to lose intent that people will think, oh, well, we're going to do this over a 5-year period or something? I think what I'm hearing is we say this is something that needs to be acted on quickly.
Okay.
That's my thought. Others may have a different thought.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Holt.
Yes, Mr. Morrow. Oh, Mr. Holt, yes.
Just one last point on it. I think after hearing Mr. Wells and Ms. McIntyre's comments, I do think that moving best embodies at least what I was originally intending with this.
Thank you. With all those discussions, I will withdraw my motion to change the word because I think I understand better what the intent is here. So is there any other further discussion?
Chairman.
So we have a proposed motion again, Mr. Mullenhour, I think you had something to say.
I think you were hearing me, Chairman Eby, and it's not an important point. I was just saying the discussion is so great and nuanced, and hopefully what this resolution will do is trigger a series of conversations. So, having language in there that is clear in terms of the intent, obviously to rework the law is going to require a lot more nuanced conversations and certainly interface with educators around how this would be best accomplished. So I just, whatever you land on, hopefully this will trigger those kind of conversations collaboratively.
Yeah, again, I think it's important. What we're saying is the intent, and then when we get down to specifics, there'll be plenty of conversations about that. But letting the legislature and the governor know what the intent of this board is, I think, is important. Any further conversations? We have a motion on the floor for the resolution. Mr. Griffin, will you please call the roll?
Aye.
We can barely hear you, Mr. Griffin.
Ms. Hartgrove,
Aye.
Mr. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen, Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Mr. Morrow, Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Aye,
Mr.
also.
Chairman.
I think Mr. Morrow just voted aye. I vote aye.
Mr. Chairman, I count 8 ayes.
Okay, the resolution passes. Now, very important, this thing, the primary sponsor of this will be Mr. Holt. We have a place here for co-sponsors. I certainly would like to be signed on as co-sponsor, and I think if other board members want to be signed on as co-sponsor, I see Mr. Morrow wants to be signed on as co-sponsor.
Chairman Eby,
Chair Hartgrove.
I would as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman, Chrissy McInturf, I would also like to be a co-chair, co-sponsor.
Chair Hartgrove, Ms. McInturf, and Mr. Morrow.
Warren Wells also.
Time going faster than
I'll get them on there.
okay. Warren Wells and Nate Morrow. I don't know if you've got them.
I will.
Okay. And we'll ask Mr. Cobbins, who wasn't here, if he'd like to be a co-sponsor too. Again, I think what's important here is that we are stating an intent of the board. It's not legislation, but the fact, again, as we said before, that we don't pass that many resolutions, I think it shows the importance that we're putting on this issue and the importance from our educators. I really appreciate Mr. Morrow's response, Ms. McInturf's input, Dr. Morrison's input, who are all educators. Means a lot to me because I'm not an educator, and I think you have a perspective. You each have a perspective that this board needs to hear, and thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Holt, for developing this resolution and working with the state board staff to develop this resolution. We will get it signed and we will then forward it on. Any further discussion? If no discussion, the purposes of this special called meeting have been fulfilled. Is there a motion to adjourn? If I have no objection, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.